Hi everyone, I'm Anuja Katrak and I'm a speech and language therapist, otherwise also known as a speech and language pathologist. I work both with children and adults. So literally my age range is 0 to 100. And I work with a lot of difficulties. It could be late talkers, it could be stammering, neurological issues, it could be brain injuries, it could be articulation difficulties. I mean, the list literally goes on and on. It also includes feeding difficulties, picky eaters. So that's what I do. I run my own practice at Opera House, and I also consult at Reach Canby and Parsi General Hospital.
Wonderful. So that's a huge range, 2 to 100. And in the
0 to
interest,
100.
0 to 100, sorry, not two. And in the interest of TRIOC, because here we're talking about raising parents, so we're raising awareness about this, which could be impacting their children, and particularly in those early years, right? Because I know as a parent coach, and I get so many questions regarding my child isn't speaking and anxiety around it, and food, the issues with textures and food. So could you talk to us a little bit about the correlation between these three topics?
Sure. So, first of all, the reason why speech therapists work with both speech and feeding is because the muscles that we use in order to talk and the muscles that we use in order to eat and drink are the same. So we cover, the entire range. The correlation lies in the bit that you need strong muscles to be able to eat, drink, swallow, chew, and you need strong muscles in order to be able to talk. So, for example, the tongue, which is a muscle, needs to be able to move around in the mouth adequately so that you can, get the right sounds out with the right accuracy and precise articulation. So, this is where we kind of link in the speech, the feeding, the swallowing, the chewing. So that's how they're linked together.
So, would it be right to say that what your child is doing with their development of their muscles in the first year of their life, in terms of eating, making sounds, is the crucial precursor to their speech development going forward?
Yes, it is. It is very important. There's no doubt about that. So, I mean, if you have a child who has not been able to develop their muscles adequately, or does have some kind of weakness in, the oral region, that's going to impact their feeding. It's going to impact, the way they chew. It's going to impact most likely the way the sounds are produced and the preciseness with which they're produced as well.
Correct. And can we talk a little bit about, because a lot of parents get concerned about how do we know what is what is going beyond developmental milestones? How do we know what could be, what in therapist parlance are red flags and yellow flags? So could you just give some sort of an idea of what do these flags mean? Because we keep using them and parents are, can you please explain what is this flag that you're talking about? And then if you could share a little bit about these milestones, although I do know that we do have, and for all these wonderful people who have joined us live and will be listening to us later, that we do have a workshop where we're going to be discussing this in much greater detail on Saturday. And you can go on to the link on Trio. India on our Instagram profile to sign up for that workshop where Anuja will be getting into much more details. But maybe we can pick up some of it today so people know.
So, okay, so even just talking about the red flags, there's a lot of detail that I could get into, but basically because we talk about red flags for late language development, we talk about red flags for speech development, and then we also talk about red flags when it comes to eating or drinking. So unfortunately, I won't be able to go into all the details, about all of this today. We'll probably do that more on Saturday. But I would like to say that when we're talking about say speech sounds, each sound has a particular timeline by which it's developed. So every sound is not expected to be developed at the same time. So, for example, the R sound, which is, the letter R, the R sound, that usually develops by around 6 years of age. When I say develops, I actually mean it's mastered by 6 years of age. So I get a lot of parents coming to me saying, my 3-year-old or my 4-year-old is not able to say R. They'll say labbit or wabbit instead of rabbit. And they're very concerned about this because there are children who can say it. So what happens with speech sounds is there is an age range by which a particular sound is mastered, but that doesn't mean that there won't be children who can say it before. There might be, and that's great, but there will be children who may not say it by 3 or 4, say for example when we're talking about the r sound, but that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. So each sound has a particular age that we have to look at, and if the child hasn't achieved a particular sound by the age range they should have, then we talk about addressing it in speech therapy. Otherwise, I always like to say, let the muscles of the mouth develop, and the sound might develop. So let's give the child the benefit of the doubt. When it comes to language and milestones for language, so you'll always, hear of, at 12 months, your child should be speaking their first words, and by 2 years they should be joining words together. So what I'd like to say is, on this is that, first of all, parents worry too much, I feel, because there's such a large variation, and when your child starts going to preschool, you interact with a lot of parents, and you see children of all abilities, and you start getting worried, well, how come my child can't talk as much as another child, for example. Now, again, this refers to age ranges. So, if a child starts saying their first words at, say, 12 months, but another child doesn't say their first word until 14 months, that doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. One has to look at the entire picture, as at the child as a whole, to see the entire developmental history, to understand what's going on. It's not just an isolated sound or an isolated word here or there. It's a lot more. I mean, it's your child at the end of the day. So I would always say, look at the child as a whole. If you have any doubt, always check. A speech therapist can always guide you, even over just a simple phone call. But the typical-ish age range, I would say, for first words is anywhere between 12 and 14, 14 and a half months. Um, by 2 years, they should be, joining 2 years plus, 2 years, 22, 23 months, they should be, sorry, 25, 26 months, they should be joining two words together. And after that, at around 2.5, one would typically see a huge growth spurt wherein they just suddenly get a lot of language all at once, and the words just come tumbling out.
Yeah.
So, instead of fixating too much on, the milestones or the exact age range, it's never exact. That's why it's a range. I would say look at the child as a whole and just get in touch with a pediatrician, a developmental pediatrician, or a speech and language therapist the minute you have a question. There's no harm.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you're saying about looking at the child as a whole, as a personal journey of my own, because my younger daughter, she's deaf, and we didn't know till she was 20 months old that her delayed speech was related to a hearing loss. And when we saw the child as a whole, there was no indication that we need to do a hearing test. And even though we were in touch with a pediatrician, it was still not enough. So I think it's important that parents understand and arm themselves with the right information and take the access of professionals that are available and around, because I know I started asking this question right after her first birthday, that why isn't she saying mama, because I had an older daughter who was, and I didn't know, to be very honest, for all my alleged wokeness that I felt I had in those days, I didn't know there was such a thing called a speech language pathologist for
I agree.
children. I
I
wasn't
agree.
from this field. I was just a mum who was winging my way through parenthood. And that was really the point, possibly the birth of Trioc, because
Right.
not knowing, even after all this knowledge and information and studies, is what guilts parents the most, right? That, but
Absolutely.
if only I knew what to do. And it's very
Right.
possible, but here's what I like to tell parents, that you might not know, but you always get a feeling. and listen to that feeling and talk to the
Right.
right people about that feeling. So don't talk to
Right.
your friend or your neighbor, because they don't necessarily, their knowledge is possibly
Absolutely.
similar sourced as yours, while someone who has those letters after their name, who has their degree, who spent years learning the nuances of what could
Right.
be the connection between these, they'd be able to see clues that somebody else hasn't.
Absolutely. Absolutely, which is why I always like to tell my parents that, if you have any doubt, don't hesitate to get in touch. You don't have to take an appointment, you don't have to do an assessment. Get in touch. I can give you information over the phone, and then you can choose to take it how you like. Once you have that information. But when you do have a doubt, don't just let it be, because you could be, wasting precious time. We always believe in early intervention.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. We were also talking sometime back, Anuja, about this thing about sippy cups. And,
Right.
this, how does one transition? Because a lot of parents ask this question: how do I transition my child into a cup eventually, or into a glass? So, what do you recommend as the transitory teats?
Okay, so first of all, there's no transition. Never introduce a sippy cup. It's as simple as that. The reason is this: the sippy cup usually has a hard spout. So actually, I should have brought one to show anyone who was interested. But it's got a hard spout, which is, it could vary in size. What happens is that hard spout rests on your tongue when you're trying to drink. It prevents that tongue from the elevation that is essential in order to, chew your food and swallow it back, take your drink from the front of your mouth to the back of your mouth. And as we spoke of a little earlier, why the muscles of speech and eating are connected, it also prevents the tongue from elevating for the essential speech sounds like t, d, l, n. So what ends up happening then is that tongue is resting front and forward, and it's not able to go up with a sippy cup. Okay, so in my opinion, never introduce a sippy cup. It's only a matter of convenience for a parent because it prevents spills. But what you can do is, as soon as your child is able to, has transitioned off from breastfeeding or formula, you can immediately start introducing slowly, first maybe just water in a spoon, okay? And once you do that, you can slowly start getting to a point where you introduce either an open cup, or you can introduce a short straw bottle. So you're not introducing anything that has a hard spout. Now, I'll tell
Hmm.
you firsthand, not only with all the practical experience that I've had over the years with children, but with my own kids. Both of them were able to master using both an open cup and a straw bottle by around 6.5, 7 months of age. So there's no need to hesitate, just go right into it. Kids are amazing. They are very, very, they're way superior to what we might think, and they'll manage. They'll be able to learn how to do it right away. So immediately go from your bottle or, breastfeeding immediately onto an open cup or a straw bottle.
Okay,
So
that's really
there's no
helpful.
transition at all.
Yeah. And I feel like, it's not that parents are really keen to introduce these sippy cups. You go into any baby shop and you're told, you see those labels, right? And you tend to believe these marketing geniuses that if they're saying this is what I'm supposed
Absolutely.
to do, you assume this is what I'm
Absolutely.
supposed to do. And this is where really corporations are not necessarily your best guide. So,
But absolutely, the way the sippy cup was invented was big. I mean, it's a complete marketing gimmick. It was invented basically by a dad who was fed up of his kids having juice spills all over the carpet, and then he needed to keep cleaning them up. So that's how it began, and it's just become a genius marketing gimmick for every parent. And it's easy because parents feel like, I can travel easier with it. When my child needs to drink in the car, we can just go. We've got a sippy cup. But it's a slight modification that you make, which can actually go a much longer way in benefiting your child. So there's no need for a transition. You go directly to a straw bottle or an open cup, or both. You can do both at the same time. I've done both at the same time. And and another thing actually I feel is that parents often get that, between 12 and 15 months, you really need to stop that bottle, because that's creating a lot of unwanted habits. And again, it's, just the nipple of the bottle is stuck on the tongue. So, each parent has a different way of going about it, either cold turkey or, easing their way out of it. But the bottom line is by between 12 and 15 months, the bottle needs to go. And, if you've introduced the sippy cup or the straw bottle, you'll have no problem.
So when you're saying between 12 and 15 months the bottle needs to go, a lot of parents come concerned that if I get rid of the bottle, I'm going to have to stop the milk because my child
Right,
isn't drinking the bottle from a cup. So what do you
right.
say to those concerns that parents keep bringing
So
up?
if you're right, so if your child wants the milk, they will drink the milk. They will learn that the milk is only being offered now in a glass or in a straw bottle, and it might take a lot of tries, yes. But the more you are persistent and consistent with it, the child will learn to follow. But if your child gets even the slightest uh, sort of inkling that you are going to give in, or you do give in, or you've given in even once, they've got you right there. So then they're not learning, and then they're going to keep asking for that bottle. And if you have the bottle at home, the parent's going to end up feeling like they have to give in.
Obviously. And it's that statement you said, if your child is going to have the milk, they're going to have the milk. And I think the big tug of war for parents is to accept that my child
Right,
is born with a set of preferences, and it's not necessarily my job to
right,
force feed the milk into them under any circumstances. So I think a big one is handling the parents' own anxiety that, or many times it's not even the parents' anxiety, it's the grandparents' anxiety, because they don't know
yes,
how to tell the grandparents that they're not feeding.
right.
I know my mother-in-law had actually started to keep, like, we lived in Delhi and we had a farm and she used to rear cows, and she was like, how can you not give my grandchildren milk from the cows that I've specially reared for them to be able to be fed? And
So it has to go in whichever way.
yeah, yeah. So I think parents need a lot of support to be able to work through um those, can I use the word, insecurities that they might be
Right,
harboring, which
right,
come in the way of developmental growth of their children. I mean, it's doing the very
right.
opposite of what they're hoping it does. And I keep saying that, every parent wants what's best for the child, but what happens is many times you don't know, and it's good to talk to be engaged in conversations like these to know better.
Right. I also think that, and I don't expect parents to know all of this if they're not from that background. I mean, but a lot of parents don't even think about this. They don't even think of the consequences that, giving up a bottle late could result in. Or they don't think of the consequences of a child starting to talk really late. I often hear, for example, I know I'm digressing a bit, but I often hear, for example, people saying, well, my husband spoke when he was a child, he spoke at 4, and I mean, he's fine. So, but there's a whole host of issues that come about as that child is growing older. Whether it's reading difficulties, spelling difficulties, academic difficulties, kind of getting pushed behind to the back of the class, or all sorts of whether it could be social difficulties, pragmatic difficulties. So the same when we talk about bottles or speech or language or feeding, if you're not sure of how a particular aspect is going to impact you if you continue doing it, you don't know any better. So you just give in because you also have to do what you have to do as a parent. So which is why I think this is great, getting this out there so that parents know there's no need to even go down the wrong road, let alone fix something that needs fixing.
Absolutely, and that's so true. I also wanted to touch upon what you've spoken about, which is the importance of language. Uh, and to be very honest, my pet peeve, which is flashcards, and
Right,
this whole culture of getting children to learn more and more by the use of flashcards, and
right,
forgetting those connecting words. So can
right,
you talk a little bit about that, about how should parents actually be encouraging the growth of language in their children and talking
right.
to them?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, flashcards are not, I'm not saying that they're necessarily, useless or not useful or anything like that. Yeah, it can be useful sometimes, but they're definitely not the only thing or the first thing or the end all and the be all that you should go to. There's so much more when it comes to language, and that can only be achieved through interaction, through the child's environment, through spending time together, quality time. Flashcards are an easy way out to just feel like you've taught your child words or vocabulary. But an even better way to teach your child vocabulary as they're growing is to literally talk about everything when you're with them, whether it's what they are doing, what you're doing, adding language to what they may have said or done. That interaction, that language rich environment, that is crucial. So flashcards are literally going to teach you, okay, maybe a heart is red, for example, or this is a duck. But then what? What about, a duck has a beak, or it has webbed feet, or it swims in the water, or whatever you want to add to that. But it's not just about a single word. And moreover, I feel more than just single words and two words together. What's important is that your child understands the connect in speech, in language,
Exactly. The context, right?
the context, the connect, how reciprocity works, how a conversation works, turn taking when you're engaging with them. There's so much to language then that goes way beyond flashcards. So definitely, I would say engage, talk about anything and everything when you're with them. Don't feel like, oh, my child is so small, they're not going to understand. That's the best way to do it.
Absolutely. So I remember early on, because of my daughter's journey, we were immersed in speech language therapy, which was slightly different because it was for a child with hearing loss. But she would
Right.
keep saying that you need to be like a broadcasting,
Absolutely.
voiceover artist and just keep
Right.
talking about everything around you because you think your child isn't absorbing, but they are, and they're absorbing
Absolutely.
structures, they're absorbing intonations, and they're absorbing context. So I would be
Correct.
told something like, if you want to teach your child apple, don't just show them the picture of an apple and the word that
Right.
is written apple, which is a very common thing people start to do, right? They show sight
Absolutely.
words. She said you
Yeah.
need to make the child taste the apple, touch the apple,
Exactly.
make an apple cake, apple pie, smell the apple. Just
Yes.
every sense needs to be engaged with the apple,
Absolutely.
because that's when, because the brain is such an interconnected web, that's when they've really cemented, okay, apple in the context of food, in the context of I like it, in the context of my stomach is grumbling or
Exactly.
protesting when I hear
Exactly.
it, right? Or smell it.
Absolutely. Which is why when we do language therapy, we literally involve all senses because that's so crucial, like you just said. That's the best way to get that language going.
Wonderful. We can keep talking, but I just wanted to check with our viewers who've joined us if they have any questions. So please put them into the comment box, and if they're there, we will pick it up and share that. But since I have you for 7 more minutes, I'm not going to wait for comments to come.
Sure.
We
I
can
well,
keep talking.
something that we haven't really talked about much as yet, which I'd like to mention, is when we're talking about feeding. I often have parents come to me with feeding difficulties or picky eating, something as basic as picky eating, which is something that's very common in the absence of any larger issue.
Yeah.
So what I always feel about this is that you need to get started on the right note. You need to get started correctly, which involves a lot of things. It doesn't involve just ensuring your child is eating a variety of foods. No, there's so much more even before that, whether it's to do with the posture, whether it's to do with your child having the right foot support so that the food is going down and getting digested. They're able to explore that food happily instead of diverting all of their energies and efforts into where their feet are. So for example, think about when you're on a bar stool and you're trying to eat an entire meal and your feet are just kind of dangling. It's effortful. It's not easy. You want to have some support, somewhere to put your feet. So I say the same for the kids. They need some support at the bottom of their feet, instead of having their feet dangling off a high chair. So there is a lot that goes into raising a healthy eater, other than just letting them be exposed to a lot of different foods. This is something we'll touch upon more on Saturday. But
That's
you know,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, I didn't know that because I keep talking about this dangling feet in the context of toilet training because I say when your child
right,
is sitting on the pot, they can't feel secure on the pot unless their feet are
absolutely,
flat. And now you're saying that's also connected to their meals.
absolutely, absolutely.
Wow. Okay, we have a question. So it's my otherwise eloquent 4-year-old went through a stage of stammering, not necessarily with the same word or sound. He got over it pretty quick by himself. Busy sometimes, I wonder, but sometimes I'm assuming. I wonder if it was natural or will it return. So stammering, could you touch upon stammering?
Absolutely. So, um, stammering has, again, when we look at a child with stammering, there's a lot to look at, whether it's genetics, whether it's any emotional or psychological things that could have resulted in it. We look at the age. So now, when you're saying that your child is 4 but got over it, often children before the age, up until the age of around 3-ish, 3.5, they might come up with a stammer because their brains are able to process so much of language in terms of receptive language or comprehension of language. And they have so many thoughts going on there because that's just working, nonstop. But their ability to express those thoughts is limited because the expressive language is not as fast as the receptive or the comprehension of language. So what happens is that there's a little disconnect, and then when they're thinking, sometimes it comes out in the form of a stammer, like, "But Mama, can I go to the garden?" They were thinking about that. So sometimes when stammers like that exist, it might resolve by the age of 4, which is why I'll often, of course, one has to look at everything in context, the child in context, but you generally don't work on a stammer before that. The only times that you give it a second thought is when either there's a very strong genetic factor or the types of stammers. There are about 11 different types of stammers. So if the types of stammers are not typical, they're not the way that a child would typically have a stammer which is outgrown, then that's a red flag. So that's something to attend to, and then figure out when the right time to work on it is. So, if your child outgrew it and is now 4 and is okay, I think that's great. That's wonderful. I hope that explains this. If it does return, considering your child has crossed 4, then definitely have a word. Check if there's anything that needs to be done.
Mm, mm. And what about a lisp? We have another question that does the lisp work similarly or is there some other factors to consider?
Okay, so first of all, just to clarify, a lisp is when the tongue usually, most often, comes out of the mouth when you're saying sounds like s or z, sometimes even sh. So, it'll end up sounding like s, the. The sun is sunny, for example. Okay, so that's a lisp. When that happens, again, I look at the child as a whole, but yes, it does need to be corrected. That usually doesn't resolve on its own. So definitely, yeah, get it checked out and corrected.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Anuja. This has been really wonderful and a treat to have you here and to learn so much from you. I'm personally looking forward to hearing so much more on Saturday at your webinar.
Okay.
I hope any of you who have questions or have people who you know could do with this know how, please do sign up for it. And we'll see you there. So thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Megha. This was lovely. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who attended.